a new planet in our solar system.
A space mission goes wrong is a plot that has been done to death. But what about a space mission that at first glance didn't go wrong, and then it did, and then it wasn't just wrong, it was really weird. That sequence of events also applies to my second driving test, where I had technically passed right up until the moment I somehow ended up parked in the frozen food aisle at the supermarket.
Well, some disorientation isn't unusual.
Here, space is not just vast, but it's really quite odd in Journey to the Far Side of the Sun.
Doppelgangers, doubles. By literal translation, the mirrored images of themselves.
Journey to the Far Side of the Sun, also known as Doppelganger, was a 1969 space thriller directed by Robert Parrish, where a space mission to investigate a newly discovered planet ends up back where it started. Or did it? Or to be more accurate,
You know perfectly well that we have a security leak.
Well, we all have our problems.
Journey to the Far Side of the Sun, also abbreviated by me to JFSOTS, is a story that's told in a way to maximise you not knowing what's going on until the end. But there's a lot of very specific and poorly thought out logic needed to make all of this work. Spoilers, it doesn't.
I agree.
The film was possibly more notable for being written and produced by Gerry and Sylvia Anderson, who had spent most of the 60s making expensive television series with fantastic special effects and a cast of puppets.
You must be joking. For grown you.
Their company Century 21 would use this movie as a springboard into making live-action productions.
I'm for go.
Let's go then.
As was fashionable for sci-fi fantasies in the 60s, JFSOTS was set 100 years after the film was made, so that's, don't tell me, 66, 67, 68, 2069.
Now, what I'm going to tell you is bizarre, weird.
After enduring a rigorous scanning process before viewing some confidential files at space agency Eurosec, a traitor manages to take some spy pics with his fake eye. Eurosec know they have a security problem, but for a while, nobody twigs who the spy is. And this is a problem that was perhaps inadvertently solved off-screen by a couple of bored investigators passing the time by playing I Spy.
Does our side have anything like this?
We have now.
The reason for all of this security? Apparently there's a new planet in the solar system, one that shares the same orbit as Earth, but is lined up so exactly that it's always obscured by the sun. It's only spotted thanks to a probe being influenced by some force.
That force, gentlemen, was the gravitational pull of another planet.
You can't see it from Earth for two reasons. One, the sun does not respond to, hey, down in front. And two, looking directly at the sun is not healthy. Only idiots look directly at the sun after being told, don't look directly at the sun. The intense head of the European Space Agency Eurosec, Jason Webb, wants to shake down his allies for £3,000 million to fund a manned mission to this planet. 3,000 million does sound like a very weird number now. We'd almost uniformly call that 3 billion. But at the time, a British billion was a million rather than 1,000 million. The thought occurs that the stinking rich in Britain were just very jealous that American billionaires had lower entry requirements.
This is a theory I prefer to believe.
And honestly, working out how many beans made a billion was already more interesting than most of the first half of this movie. American astronaut Glenn Ross will lead the mission, along with astrophysicist Dr. John Kane. Kane himself is not an astronaut and has to undergo rigorous training for the mission to the planet on the other side of the sun. Back at home, Ross is having marital problems with his wife, Sharon. She blames their inability to have kids on sterility induced by Ross's constant space missions, while he blames her use of the pill.
Liftoff, now minus 1 hour.
Okay, there's no linkage there. But unlike Glenn Ross, the mission finally blasts off and the Phoenix begins its 3-week journey to the new planet, where there would also be a 3-week return journey. Through all of this, the astronauts will be sleeping most of the time, while I, as the viewer, am thinking, you lucky bastards.
Seascape and vegetation. So far, no sign of life.
When Ross and Kane arrive at the new planet, they'll transfer to a smaller craft known as the Dove and visit the surface of this new planet, except things just don't go so well and they crash. Kane pulls Ross out of the wreckage, but he's soon seriously injured. And just then, a Mongolian search and rescue vessel shows up to collect the astronauts. Ross wakes up back at base, which is odd since he's only been gone 3 weeks, which is only enough time to get to the new planet, but not enough time to return, so everybody wants to know why he seemingly turned back.
We crashed.
On Earth?
On the planet.
You're here, on Earth.
He's questioned, then interrogated, then put through all manner of less than pleasant information extraction procedures, but all the while he sticks to his story. We as the audience have been given a few hints, but Ross doesn't realise what's happened until he returns home to find light switches in the wrong place or labels that he can only read in a mirror. Hang on a minute.
Everything is reversed.
Kane, who was unable to back up Ross's story, would finally succumb to his wounds. The autopsy revealed his anatomy was reversed, which does back up Ross's story.
I propose a complete duplication of matter.
Ross outlines to Webb his theory about an exact duplicate of Earth, even down to the people, where there are minor differences such as mirrored imagery. The proof would be for Ross to head up to collect the flight recorders from the Phoenix in orbit. Otherwise, Ross will be officially labelled as insane.
It's only a theory.
If things like writing, hairdos, steering wheels, and anatomy are all reversed, what about something as fundamental as the polarity of electricity? Or even more profoundly, is YouTube on the reversed planet full of bottom 10 count-up videos?
Why did you reverse Doppelganger, Colonel? It's an inside joke between me and myself.
Ross goes up by himself despite the fact that he has to fly a plane backwards as far as he's concerned.
There are definitely two planets. Identical but reversed in some way.
But of course, something goes wrong and he loses communication with Eurosec. Some more things go even less well, leading to Ross crashing back to Earth and destroying the Eurosec base. We cut to Webb as an old man in a nursing home. He was the only survivor of the Eurosec disaster, and such was the secrecy, there is no proof about anything, only his word. And then for some reason, he rams his wheelchair into a mirror. Son of a gun.
Read it!
Fire emergency checklist. In the event of fire, priorities are assigned as follows.
Journey to the Far Side of the Sun is a weird slice of late 60s science fiction with some outstanding visuals for the time,
Thank God for that.
but a story that mixed the obtuseness of 2001: A Space Odyssey, a European art house movie, popular British television dramas about business intrigue, the visuals of a super high budget episode of Thunderbirds, and a few twists that make you think Rod Serling is about to appear.
And they won't know until I've established exactly what happened.
We have covered some of Gerry and Sylvia Anderson's work before, but very briefly. The married couple created and produced some very glossy kids programs throughout the 1960s. By kids programs, we're talking about series that would eventually boast special effects far in excess of what most British programs aimed at adults were able to produce. They'd started with puppet shows aimed at very young kids, and then progressed to puppet westerns. And with Supercar, they hit upon their magic formula: gadget-laden action-adventure. Fireball XL5 took the action into space, while Stingray, their first series made in full colour, sent things underwater faster than Henry and Liza's bucket used as an emergency flotation device. Thunderbirds in 1965 was a smash success, but it would prove to be the Andersons' peak in terms of the popularity of their kids' shows. While it was marionettes that made their reputation, the Andersons, with Gerry in particular, hated them and had always wanted to do live action. While the series Captain Scarlet, Joe 90 and Secret Service moved towards realistically proportioned stars, they had lost some of their charm. And by the end of the 60s, the Andersons would officially be out of the puppet business.
Sure, but wasn't that part of the plan?
The makers of several great supermarionation series were no longer the masters of puppets.
I'm afraid it's goodbye.
The Andersons' boss, Lou Grade, had suggested that they pitch ideas to Universal when that studio set up an office in Britain with the idea of perhaps financing film projects.
How much is it going to cost us this time?
The Andersons' simple idea about a mirror Earth intrigued Universal's Jay Cantor.
Everything is reversed, huh?
But he wasn't convinced that the Andersons on their own were right for the project. The addition of experienced American director Robert Parrish, recently one of the directors on Casino Royale, would help secure a green light for the film.
The council felt railroaded into this project from the start.
Writer Tony Williamson, a prolific scribe for ITC's action-adventure series in the 60s, had written a script as a one-hour television episode, which the Andersons liked. They took on the development of the script with another frequent writer on ITC programs, Donald James. This wasn't the first live-action project of the Andersons. Gerry Anderson had directed a very low-budget crime thriller in 1960, but in the intervening years, Gerry and Sylvia Anderson had made their bones with puppets. I mean, those shows were quite expensive, but no matter how good they were still kids' shows, made with puppets. So with this as their first foray into big-budget live-action filmmaking, they wanted this not to seem like a kids' show. Part of that was to make the film more mature, weirder, and darker. I mean, there's almost no humour in this film, which, if you've made it this far into the video, you might be thinking that's ironic, but this film is very, very dry. When it's not dry, it goes a little dark. So, honestly, if you need to lighten the mood right now, buy higher wattage bulbs.
America's top astronaut. Sterile.
To make this G-rated film seem less like a kid's film, we had the brutal killing of the one-eyed spy, a very deadly end for almost every single character in this movie, love triangles between Ross, Sharon and Lisa, Sharon's implied infidelity, and the Rosses' marriage breaking down, ostensibly over their inability to have kids. It's something so unlike anything the Andersons had done previously, unless of course I missed the episode of Thunderbirds where Tintin and Alan had a massive argument because his constant space missions in Thunderbird 3 had caused his wooden penis to fall off.
Never mind, Alan.
But fundamentally I think the central premise, which is interesting, if a little far-fetched, just never really works. The idea of the mirrored Earth is telegraphed fairly early with some footage optically flipped, but Ross takes an absolute age before he notices the label on a perfume bottle. For somebody sent to a new planet to observe, he's not somebody who seems to pay a lot of attention.
He went crazy. He said his own handwriting was reversed, my watch, everything.
The early part of the film with all of the intrigue was in their part because the Andersons seemed to like those boardroom dramas of the mid-60s, where strident businessmen tried to outmaneuver each other, take over companies, and deal with industrial action. They even cast a few actors from some of those series, starting with Patrick Wymark as Jason Webb. This was one of his last roles before suddenly passing away at the age of 44 in 1970, just as he was about to go on an Australian talk show. Roy Thinnis had starred in The Invaders, so he was now semi-typecast as a sci-fi guy. Thinnis' wife, Lynn Loring, stepped in at the last minute to play Ross's wayward wife, Sharon. Lonnie von Friedel was Lisa, who's got a connection with Ross that doesn't really go much beyond some knowing looks. Ian Hendry played Kane, somebody who had no intention to ever go into space, and he was actually probably right in that regard. Hendry's departure from the television series The Avengers changed the course of that series, and with it British television in general. But by now Hendry himself was less of a lead and more of a character actor, and he by far gives the most natural performance in this movie.
And you better attend to that cardiac warning.
Herbert Lom appeared as the I Spy guy, and much of the rest of the cast would work for the Andersons at some point on one series or another. Ed Bishop and George Sewell would star in the Andersons' next series, UFO, and many of the supporting players in that series would also appear in the movie somewhere along the line. There are also many props and costumes from this movie that would also be recycled in UFO, so if you've watched the film and that series, you'll have fun spotting what was reused. The futuristic cars and other ground vehicles would also be revamped, repainted and repurposed in UFO, much like how many of the jokes in this review were revamped, repainted and repurposed from our now deleted review of the infamous movie Herbie Goes to Jonestown.
I don't know. There's a lot I can't explain.
It wasn't just the cast, many of the production crew were also stalwarts of the Anderson shows, with Derek Meddings and his special effects team putting out some of their best work on this movie. It's somewhat unusual for using blue screen work for special effects, which wasn't all that common at the time, but overall the effects have held up rather well. And then at other times, there are some more old-fashioned methods being used, such as this video conference where the screens were just holes in the set with actors sitting behind. Also of note is composer Barry Gray's lush score, where it has echoes of his work on series like Thunderbirds. The production design is outstanding, with some nice sets for the Eurosec facilities, the various houses, and the spacecraft interiors. Most of the live-action portion of the film was made at Pinewood Studios in the UK. Locations were in Portugal, and miniatures were mainly filmed by Century 21 staff at their facility in Slough. Now, I am really glad that they got those places in the right order, because shooting miniatures in Portugal while trying to find glamorous locations in Slough may have been a challenge.
Till we find out what the devil's gone wrong.
The production rolled on about as smoothly as a Ford Fiesta without an engine. That is, it could move, but only downhill.
Correct.
Director Robert Parrish clashed with the Andersons on various points where Parrish didn't want to film scenes that he knew he was going to cut anyway, while Gerry and Sylvia Anderson would each say separately that hiring Parrish was a mistake. The director and producers also had a difficult relationship with the film's star, Roy Thinnis, but he was at least not one of the film's major weak spots. Another casualty of the production, the long-standing working relationship between the Andersons and John Reed, a partner in Century 21 and the film's cinematographer. There were various disagreements along the way, including how Reed decided to light a gratuitous shower scene. This would see Reed resign from the company that he'd been part of for many years. And then, of course, there were just problems with the basic idea and the script. The central premise of the movie, A Mirror Image Earth, required a lot of pre-planning to make all of this work. Some scenes involved special props with backwards text. Some scenes were optically flipped. That part of the production is mostly well done. It's not 100% consistent, making this a film that's perfect for the ultra-pedantic nitpicker who really wants to sink their teeth into something. The easiest nitpick in Journey to the Far Side of the Sun, a film that ends on a perfect mirror image of Earth, still skips no one. When you base the entire film on a central conceit and it just doesn't work, then the film doesn't work.
But it's the only theory that fits the facts.
The script likes to think that it's building up to this big mystery, despite it soon being really obvious what's happening. But it's such a convolution that it really needs a lot of exposition to get the idea across, and then it doesn't really do much with it. Ross never gets further than his house, and then to wrap everything up with some spectacle, another space mission that just ends with a major disaster, and the deeply unsatisfying twist of Webb being the only person that knows that any of this happened. And then he attacks a mirror for no apparent reason.
And it doesn't make sense.
So, good bits. Excellent special effects, great sets, good costumes, some interesting weirdness, and a good cast. Less good bits, also known as bad bits. It's just generally plodding with a languid pace. Some of the acting is very one note. Some characters are unlikable, others are paper thin. So we have a good cast, but not necessarily great acting. And that's down to the fact that the cast is good in other productions, with a different director and a better script.
There are other American astronauts.
That's right.
The Andersons' live-action productions would forever receive criticism for wooden acting, since no one has ever made a joke about their history with puppets in a review. Not once ever. However, they could have done themselves a favour by bringing a stage magician to the set to use the magic hula hoop to prove that there really were no strings.
The man you know as Colonel Ross is on the other planet, standing in an identical, except reversed room.
We have a clever effect shot of the two Roy Thinnesses explaining the plot just before we kill everybody else off to make this seem worthy and mature. In the end, after all of the build-up, the mystery and the clues, the payoff is not all that satisfactory. While there was a major push towards making the visuals pop in this movie, and the visuals are very, very nice most of the time, there just really was not enough emphasis on getting the script right.
Instruments indicate negative, still negative, positive, still positive.
For a film based around a mirror image Earth, there's a lot of flip-flopping about. There were minor differences in how the film was released around the world. US prints billed Thinnes ahead of Hendry, while the British versions swapped the billing. Somewhere along the line during the script development, the characters of Dr. Kane and Ross swapped roles halfway through the movie, where in the finished movie, Ross ends up surviving for most of the film.
I don't want details.
There was even more flipping drama, as in drama about flipping something and not some sort of restrained expletive by a schoolteacher in London. When a version of this film was transferred to television, a technician didn't realise that much of the last third of the film was meant to be flipped, and so they corrected it. Now that makes a film that was already stingy with clues even stingier than my Uncle Roger, who of course is so cheap that he won't install a doorbell and instead just dumped an old piano next to his front door with some sheet music. Be right back, someone's at the door.
Still doesn't make sense.
On release in 1969, the film did not resonate with critics or audiences, where a combo of mixed reviews and poor ticket sales meant that the film would kind of sink without trace.
It must have been rough.
The Andersons would never produce another feature film. Well, not one that didn't start as a television episode. But by the time of the film's release, the Andersons were already hip-deep in purple wigs and green aliens, producing their first live-action television series, UFO, which again had great special effects, attempts at mature but obtuse storytelling, and stiff characters that were often likened to puppets. But UFO does at least have a sort of charm to it that this film does seem to almost completely lack.
Well, I think we're set.
Journey to the Far Side of the Sun is a film I know I've seen a few times before, but when I rewatch it, I realise just how little of it I remember.
Are you surprised that no one believes me?
It's one of those films where you might want to like it for its style, the spectacle, the special effects, and the involvement of the Andersons. But like a hedgehog humping your leg, the film doesn't really do anywhere near enough to make you love it. I'm generally a fan of the Andersons' television work, but Journey ends up suffering the same fate as the two Thunderbirds feature films. They're all big, they're visually impressive, but ultimately unsatisfying and a bit empty. Journey can also fall into the trap of just being a bit dull to watch, despite all the visuals. It's less 2001 and more 2000 than none. If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.
The Dalatech Affair. The Dalatech Affair. The Dalatech Affair.